Okay, Shawn Baker, welcome to the Mostly Training podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's an honor. I'm really excited to talk to you. Like we talked off camera, we've kind of known each other virtually for quite a few years now. So it's good to see and finally catch up with you.
And in that time, I've watched you go from like a guy that I recognize as, okay, this is a orthopedic surgeon and he's into the indoor rowing and he's in his 50s, but he likes to get after it. And then simultaneous to that, you've had this career trajectory of both prominence, increasing prominence. So you've gone from this small-ish corner of the internet of indoor rowing sprint enthusiasts, and sort of how we came to know each other. And then as you've delved deeper into the carnivore stuff, and it's certainly become more and more popular, your profile has become something else entirely.
Yeah, it's been quite the evolution. Not one I would have predicted. It's kind of one of those things where, just life takes you where it goes. And as I've realized in your own life, I mean, you went from an Olympic rower, rowing in the Olympics to strength training and now to all these different aspects. So yeah, it's fun to see where things go and what you can have success at and how hard it is. I mean, that's the thing to appreciate. If you're good at anything, it's incredibly hard, as I'm sure
Yeah.
you'll admit.
I find it all pretty hard. There's not a like a lot, especially in the sporting side of things, that I've ever felt really came naturally. More that I understood training enough to be able to put the right inputs in and then see how much progress you can make over time. Um, you are known as, not only a carnivore, but maybe even the carnivore. But my guess is that you identify as an athlete, if not first, but that's definitely how you see yourself, as it's at least as important as in terms of what you do professionally.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, many people have come to know me when I was on Rogan podcast talking about this meet, but there's a lot more things I have an interest in, and first and foremost, as a physician, I mean, I'm interested in getting people healthy, and it's while nutrition is part of that, there's so much more that goes into it, and yeah, I mean, I've been an athlete since. I mean, it's kind of a funny. When I was I think a 9-year-old kid, so I was born in '67, so 1976, I think Bruce Jenner won the Olympic
Mm.
decathlon, and that inspired me. I remember I organized the neighborhood Olympics around my neighborhood, and I was, doing that. So I've been an athlete my whole life. Now Bruce Jenner, who now is Caitlyn Jenner, he doesn't inspire me quite in the same way,
Okay.
certainly. But I mean, I certainly have been involved in athletes my whole life. I've never been like a really good athlete. Like I never had that like super high level, Olympic level, professional level, but I mean, as an older guy, I mean, I've continued to grind and push, and compared to my peer groups, I've been fairly being able to compete at a fairly high level, winning world champions just in a masters level, setting multiple different world records and so on and so forth. So I mean, I guess when I was younger, I probably had the physical capacity. I just never had the coaching and direction to maximize my potential until I started doing it my own, kind of blooming late. I didn't really start blooming athletically probably until after college, which is
Yeah.
really late. I mean, I started playing rugby. I mean, of all things. I mean, I don't know, I lived in New Zealand and I got to play rugby in their top league. Got to play against a lot of the New Zealand All Blacks. And so I was, but I didn't start that until I was, gosh, 22, 23 years of age. And so
Yeah.
that's a late time to start into high level athletics for
But
sure.
if you were into it when you were 9, the irony is that Bruce Jenner that's very much the Wheaties box era, which
Yeah.
sort of running diametrically opposed to where you are now.
Oh,
But
yeah, from a
yes,
dietary standpoint, absolutely.
yeah.
It's kind of interesting. I'll just another sort of interesting side note. My mother, South African, right?
Mm.
So spent a lot of time down there as a kid. She is relatives to this group of people called the Hewlett Sugar Industry. They're like the largest sugar producing company in South Africa, or one of the largest.
Wow.
And of course now I'm pretty much I don't eat. I'm not a fan. I'm gonna say I'm not a fan of it, but I just don't consume any producible sugar anymore in my life. So yeah, I mean those I know there's a lot of things that I say or allude to that a lot of people would find a lot of maybe it might be controversial in a way. I mean, uh, I think with the belief around carbohydrates and athletic performance, I mean, there's obviously since about 1967, the year I was born, when the Scandinavians started to talk about carb loading and glycogen restoration, that has been that's been the overwhelming focus on nutrition. I think there's more nuance to that at this point. And I can tell you as an old guy, I'm almost 60 now. I just turned 58. I've got 2 years till I'm turning 60. In my view, I mean, carbohydrates should be viewed as what's the minimum effective dose I need to get the job done. Because at least in my own particular sense, I mean, if that's overconsumed for me, and overconsume means I just don't feel good.
Yeah.
And when you don't feel good, you don't perform well. I mean, I think it's as simple as that. As someone who trains for an Olympics, you've trained 4 years for, in your case, 6 minutes on the water, right? Um, there's a lot that goes into that 4 years. And if you don't feel good 20% of the time because you're achy and beat up, it's going to detract from your overall performance. And so it's more than just what one individual workout yields. It's what the breadth of time exposure yields. And that's where I think there's some nuance around that.
Yeah, how much you're dealing with inflammation, for example, how it's affecting your sleep, how it's affecting your recovery. And I do want to get into the nutrition a bit, but I want to know a little bit more about how you got there, because if you grew up in this era where carbo loading for sports performance, and if you were in New Zealand in your 20s, that's basically like being anywhere else in the world 10 years
Mm-hmm.
prior, because New Zealand is, if Australia gets things a little bit late, New Zealand gets things a little bit later. That's still the case now, but it would have been even more dramatic then. So you would have grown up with a pretty conventional exposure to nutrition, but this would have been simultaneous as you training as a surgeon.
Yes, yeah, in
Yeah.
many ways, yeah, yeah. I mean, when I lived in New Zealand, I remember it was Weetabix was the big
Yeah,
thing. I don't know
yeah.
if that's I know it's like an
It's still
Australian,
it's
New
still a
Zealand thing.
thing. And when we
Yeah,
came back from the US I was looking at in the to see what cereals had added sugar versus what were just the grains. As
mhm.
much out of curiosity, I also wanted to see which ones that now added in seed oils for some inexplicable reason. So you've got something like a wheat bix, which is just wheat, and then now it's wheat and sugar and vegetable oil. And
Mhm.
so the fuckery is extensive. And so even what it was back then, even if it was in principle the same product, is no longer the same. And we're seeing the results. But for you, just to put the caveat in that you won't for your athletic development, there, as far as I can tell, reasons, because you were taking your studies seriously, and to be an orthopedic surgeon, that's a process. That's not a 4 year degree. So you had to commit a chunk of time to this. How I want to know what the path was when you were at high school and then you did college in the US.
Yes.
And then once you graduated undergrad, did you go to NZ, or did you do your medical degree in the US as well?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting story. So sort of normal pathway, high school, college, got a biology degree, got accepted in medical school, started in medical school. Unfortunately, I started playing rugby in medical school as well. So our medical school actually had a team, and I was kind of like, because I was a big guy and I was pretty fast and could jump. They said, and I was working out in the gym, and there's a guy named his name was Paul McCartney, and he wasn't one of the
Yes.
Beatles, but he ended up being a chiropractor. But he said, hey, look, if you want to continue to train in my gym, you need to come play rugby. And I said, well, why not? What the heck? I'll go do that. And so I ended up just being talented just based on athletic ability. I didn't have any training prior to that. And so I started playing for this team in Galveston, Texas. I was selected to the All Texas team fairly quickly after that. And then I was selected for the All Western United States team just based on athletic ability. I was fast, I could jump, and I was tall. Didn't have a lot of rugby skill, but anyway. But during that time, we had a professor of physiology from New Zealand, and they had a team that traditionally would bring someone in, an import in every year. They bring
Okay.
South Africans in, occasionally bring Americans in, and they asked if I'd like to go. And I was in the middle of I was literally finishing my first year of medical school. And, unfortunately, I was married. I went through a divorce, and I was like, F it. I'm just going to play rugby. So I sent my letter and my letter of leaving medical school. That was met with a lot of anguish and grief from the medical school professors because I
Yeah.
was a pretty good student. But I said, I'm just going to go play rugby. So I left, went down to New Zealand, had a great time there. I mean, it was wonderful. I'm glad I did. It was a wonderful experience. And then I came back and I still wanted to play. And this is 1992-ish, 92, 93. In the U.S. and still today in the U.S., the rugby is seriously underdeveloped compared to what it is in, say, Australia, New Zealand,
Yeah.
England, so on and so forth. But um, at that time, the military had a pretty good program. You could play internationally through the military. So I ended up joining the military just so I could continue my rugby career. So I
That was
spent about,
the
yeah, that
impetus.
was one of the
Yeah.
impetuses for
Right.
that. Yeah, so I could continue to play. And I was in between medical school and I was like, I'm not sure if I'm ready to go back yet. So I joined the military. My day job was to launch nuclear weapons, but then I played rugby for the armed forces team. And I did that for about 7 years until I was about 30 years of age. I remember I was playing this team from Russia. I was playing for a team in Denver. We were playing this Russian team. And I was laying on the bottom of a ruck and some guys kicking me in the head. And, I think I had 3 tries that game. So I was having quite a good game. But there was blood pouring out my ears. I was 30 years old and I was just like, I'm done. It's time. So I reapplied back to medical school, got in, and then, started on my sort of the rest of my academic career. And then, that's in the best of circumstances, that's a 13-year journey, 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 5 years of surgical training. And so I had a 7-year break in there. So from start to finish, it was almost a 20-year journey for me
Yeah.
to start school to finish my degree, or to
So was
finish all
there
my
chunks
surgical
in there
training.
where you were basically a rugby player? Like that's what you were doing? Or was
Yeah,
it,
well, I mean, yeah, for about 7 years. I mean,
yeah,
that was my
chunk
my
of
sort
time?
of my profession of choice. I mean, I did a little powerlifting before I did rugby.
Hmm.
I started doing power. I started lifting weights when I was, I think, 13.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I've always been doing it. I'm 58 now, so I've been doing it for 45 years. The first time I ever deadlifted, I mean, the first time I ever even tried it, I pulled 455 pounds. So that's, just slightly over 200 kilos. So that's a decent
There's
natural
some talent.
ability.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I peaked at like 350 kilos. I remember I hit 350 kilos while I was a medical student. This is in my third or fourth year of medical. It's 2000. So what do you, I can't remember. I think I was a third year medical student. And, I just missed, it was like a second attempt. I just missed 783. It was like midnight. It was a really long meet. I was like, I was the last guy to lift because I had the biggest deadlift.
Yeah.
It was like 100 people. It was like so anyway, I mean, but then I started into my very busy time, and I did, you go 5 years without sleeping basically in your surgical residency. It's just like working 120 hours a week, and so it wasn't conducive to making good athletic gains. I still train. I mean, I trained all the time. I mean, I did as much as I could, but that was kind of the end of my competitive powerlifting career. As far as I would have liked to have gotten an 800-pound deadlift. That would have been pretty significant, but still, it's pretty good. And I did it as a lifetime drug-free guy. I've never taken steroids. I've always been I just never wanted to, never had the desire. I don't take testosterone like a lot of people assume I do because I'm an old guy that still lifts weights and still reasonably strong. They think, oh, you must be on testosterone. I'm like, no, I just don't have a desire to do that.
Yeah. And the fact that you had these performances on the board when you were young would indicate something of the potential that you're still demonstrating now, and the fact that you've, despite these life evolutions, you've always kept training.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
I think there's obviously strength is generally beneficial. I mean, there's obviously a limit to where there's diminishing returns. I mean, you only need to be so strong to
Yeah.
row a boat or run fast or whatever your sport may be. But I mean, I think having a decent foundation pays on lifelong dividends. And you're going to get that 20s and 30s is the optimal time to really pack on that strength. And then it takes a little bit less to maintain it, and I still like to touch it frequently, not, a couple times a month I try to hit something fairly heavy just to sort of kind of keep that going, and then work on some of the other things that, we lose with age. Right now my focus is sprinting, not
Yeah.
just sprinting on the rowing machine, but actually running, physically sprinting, which is very demanding, as you know. I mean, it's got just tremendous forces across the lower extremities, and trying to keep healthy enough to do that, which requires, it requires effort. It just doesn't, It's not like when you're 20 or 15 or a kid.
Yeah, yeah.
You gotta do the things and it's, fair enough. I mean, when you're a kid, you don't have a lot of stress, you don't have a lot of responsibilities. You can run around and play, and it's something you always do. When you get older, you stop doing that.
It's one of those use it or lose it situations. And I've had noticed, other than the sprinting on the row machine, but that you've been doing sprinting in the way that most people imagine it, outside and on the treadmill, but you've also included the whole time I've been aware of you and your training, jumping. And
Yeah.
jumping and sprinting are these things that people stop doing, and then they think, when was the last time I jumped? And it may have been a decade. And then there's a lack of confidence to even leave the ground, and then that gets worse over time. Whereas if you keep chipping away at it, you can not only maintain, but maybe even develop some of these attributes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I mean, it's not unusual to see strong old guys. I mean, you guys are benching 400 plus pounds,
Yeah.
in their 50s and 60s. That's not unusual, and sometimes even more. And it's not unusual to see people with a pretty good endurance performance into their older age. You see these 70, 80-year-old guys running marathons, but it's pretty unusual to see someone that can jump agilely and sprint very fast, because that is, I mean, it's just much more difficult to maintain that.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not that you can't do it. I think you can, but I think it just takes consistency of effort. I mean, it's a willingness to do the plyometrics, to willingness to engage in the activities, to willingness to, strengthen. I mean, I think isometrics have a pretty good role here. Particularly for tendon health. And so I've been incorporating it. Not like I said, I've sprinted my whole life in conjunction with sports. Like when you're playing rugby, you got to sprint somewhat. I mean, it's not like on the track with spikes, with perfect form, but you're running at a pretty good
Hmm.
clip. And I think that's something that, I mean, even when I was in my mid 40s, still weighing 280 pounds, I could still dunk a basketball, pretty easily. I dunked the basketball when I turned 51, at about 250 pounds of body weight. So my goal is to hit it again when I'm 60, which will be pretty remarkable. There's not a
You
lot of
are still
60-year-olds.
training for that.
Oh,
That's,
absolutely.
yeah,
Oh, absolutely. I've got a handful of goals when I turn 60. One is to break a few Concept 2 sprint records, which I think I should be able to do pretty handily, because
yeah.
I'm still, I just, in fact, this is something interesting. Max wattage. I would go in there, 5 pulls. How many watts could I hit? And the best I'd ever pull was like 1354. This is when I was 51. That's a 104
Yeah.
low pull. And a couple weeks ago, I hit a 1371. So I hit a 103. First time in my life I've ever done that. Hit a
Mm.
103 low split at 58 years of age, I'm pretty happy with that.
Pretty, yeah,
I got
pretty
to say.
encouraging.
So
It seemed
yeah,
like you were pretty happy with that. And I could connect with why, because there's this thing that's objective, and you've got this number which
yeah.
you've been able to produce historically, and then it doesn't seem like it's even been the thing that you've been pursuing directly, that you've maintained some of the erg stuff, but you've been sprinting and doing plyos, keeping up with the strength side of things, but you're getting older. So there'd be this belief that there'd be a drop off, but it's increasing.
Well, and I think honestly, and what I attribute to, because my diet hasn't changed, my training has changed somewhat. I mean, my emphasis has been on max velocity sprinting on the ground, true sprinting. And I think there is a CNS carry over to
Yeah.
that. And it's just, you just have that firing CNS that allows you to do that. Because, when you're trying to row at 50, 60 strokes per minute, I mean, that's CNS stuff. That's
Yeah.
coordination that has to be there, regardless of how strong you are. Because
Yeah.
and my strength is good. I mean, I'm still deadlifting. I can pull 500 pounds for a set of 10 with a conventional deadlift. And, I'm focusing on that stuff. So I think again, the difference between 1354 watts and 1371 is not much, but it's still better. I mean, it's a
Oh
number.
yeah,
I mean,
that's the trend is the
yeah,
important
yeah,
thing.
right. And
Yeah.
as you know, I mean, that Concept 2 is unforgiving. It
Yeah.
does not discriminate. It doesn't care what you feel like. It's the number. It's either there, it's not. And it's like lifting weights. I mean, 600 pounds is 600 pounds. It's always the same, which is nice to have those bars to compare it to.
Yeah.
And I like, from a motivation standpoint, as an old guy, I'm like, well, I'm never going to hit a PR in my deadlift. What else can I do that I haven't done
Yeah.
in a while? And you can always be better than yesterday. You might not beat yourself 20 years ago, but you're damn sure you can beat yourself yesterday. That's the way I look at it. And then
Yeah, and
occasionally, you'll
you
find
can also
something. Yeah.
find new stuff to get better at.
Well, absolutely. That's the
Yeah.
thing. I'm looking at so let me go back to when I turn 60 goals. I want to be able to break, concept 200 meter, 1 minute, 500. Maybe I'll get crazy and go do 1,000 or something like that. As you know, the 2K, people always say, why don't you do a 2K? I'm like, I don't want to train for that. it's just, do it to pull a good 2K. That is a lot of commitment and dedication and suffering. And I'm kind of a wimp in that way. I don't want to suffer too much. I don't mind training hard, but I don't want to suffer that much. But it's like that. It's like, can I run a sub 6,400 meters, which is, it's not that fast, but there's not a lot of guys that can run 60, sub 6,400 at my age and then give them my weight, because I'm still going to be I probably will have to lose, 12 kilos to reach those. My predictions are based on what I do now. Can I dunk a basketball? Can I do a backflip just for fun? I think believe it or not, I don't think a backflip's that hard. I did one when I was 50. I was like, okay, I'm going to try it. I got out in the
Yeah.
gym and I just practiced and was able to do one. Now, granted, it was into a soft landing area, which I think I'm not stupid. I mean, I'm crazy, but I'm not stupid, Um, and then what is it? Run a sub 6 minute mile, which won't be fun, but I think I can do that. It's all in the same. And still deadlift
That
600
seems like
pounds.
that
Yeah.
mile challenge is within the ballpark of the 2K, and that everything you'd mentioned
Yeah.
up until then
Right.
was
Right.
pretty
Right. Right.
glycolytic. All the longest would have been around a minute 15, and that would have been the
Yeah.
500 because you've got
Yeah.
dunk, 100, backflip. They're all
Yeah.
either
They're all
glycolytic,
short. Yeah.
yeah,
They're
they're
all creatine
entirely,
phosphate anaerobic
yep,
system. And then you got
yep,
to put that in there. But it's not that I don't plan on doing them all in the same day. This is within the same year.
yes.
And so, I mean, it's, you spend a couple months dedicated to sucking it up and suffering for a little while. And I think, as you probably know, when you saw that 500-meter row, if you bring your overall ceiling really, really high,
Mhm.
if you can consistently hit splits of 104, 103, 112 isn't that bad. It's
Yeah.
just like it's relative. But if all you can do is a 108, good luck hitting a 112 for 500 meters. I mean,
The thing with
God
indoor
forbid you do.
rowing is that if you look at the 2K distance, and you would know this because once you're on the erg and you're producing decent numbers over the shorter distances, and then all of the people from the rowing world, and I think it's often from a place of curiosity, they want to see what you can do. So they're like, well, go ahead and wait, you do a 2K. And if you're coming from the shorter distances up, it's probably a bigger ask than if you're coming from an endurance space, and then 2K is relatively concise. And then the shorter stuff is a little bit more of a stretch. But I noticed that with rowers, with the volume required, all of the top end goes away. As you're probably training for a 2K, your explosive potential gets lower. But if you want to go under 6 minutes, for example, and sitting on 129 that's a hard output to produce, then doing it for 6 minutes is going to be more challenging than if it's easy to produce. So you want to be able to produce the number easily, and then you want to have a system where you can sustain that output for the duration of the piece.
Yeah. And, the thing is for that is like, okay, I could do that, but what are my goals as a human being? It's
Yeah.
like, do I want to sacrifice? Because the muscle that I put on my body was hard. It was hard earned. I mean, it took a lot of time and effort to produce that capacity. And I mean, honestly, I just think that, I think when you look at aging, it's like, what is your capacity? you know. And if I can sprint really, really, really fast, then how hard is it for me to run at a decent clip? I mean, it's pretty easy. But if all I ever do is run kind of fast, that's an ask for me. And that becomes an ask. And so I want to keep those ceilings and those margins of what I can do very broad so that, because as you get older and older, I mean, these things start to narrow and narrow, and eventually it's bed to couch to toilet to refrigerator, and then pretty soon you're just bed and then you're dead. And so I think keeping those capacities very high and broad is a much better way to age. And so I think touching those, uh, like max effort sprinting, touching that a couple times a week, just very small dosages, like when I'm sprinting, and again, I'm running on the treadmill right now because it's icy and cold and slippery, and you live in the Pacific Northwest, and it's not fun to slip and hurt yourself. And so
No.
I'm doing it's not optimal, but it's it's a self-propelled runner. It's it's not powered. It's just it's like a Woodway type of device, and you know
It's the
it's like
assault treadmill, isn't it? Just
yeah, it's an
yeah,
assault
correct.
treadmill. So
Yep,
I mean,
yep,
there's a correlate. It's not exact, but it's close. It's close.
yep.
I've gone on the track and I've compared the times, and they're not too far off. But what I find is I'm only spending maybe in a training session 4 or 5 seconds at max velocity because you can only maintain max velocity for even Usain Bolt when he's winning the 100,
Yeah,
he's at max
30.
velocity for maximum maybe 30 meters, maybe from
Yep.
60 to 90. And that takes him, it takes him 2.3 seconds or something like that. So they're not maintaining that very long, and you can't really do that. So I just, hit it for a couple seconds, a couple times, 4 or 5 times a week total, total reps. And I think that's all you need in many ways.
Yeah, I do firmly believe that that sort of stuff, the sprinting, the really short, high intensity efforts are the fountain of youth. Um, I do wonder though with this aerobic training, and I say this as I have a vested interest because I'm training for a marathon. We were talking about this briefly off air, but the caveat is to run some 3 hours at over 220, which I haven't seen done before. So that's kind of the appeal, but it does feel like in terms of the maintaining muscle mass and maintaining these qualities that you want to hold on to, ability to jump, ability to sprint, that there's a cost for those by pursuing this endurance goal. And my the trade-offs I was making in my mind was that it'll get worse as I get older, in that doing this in my 50s, it will be more of a cost, but I do definitely see it as a cost and not something that's health promoting. But I think most people would think training for a marathon is healthy and that you're not going to get an awful lot out of the sprinting. But I actually think that the way that you're going about it is the thing that's maintaining your qualities and the thing that'll keep you young at least as much as your nutrition is.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, I think, just from a time cost, I mean,
Yeah.
to train for a marathon, to run a sub 3 hour marathon at, whatever weight, you got to put a lot of time. There's a lot of time invested. And as you know, as a rower, I mean, how many hours do you guys spend a day on the water? 4, 5, 6 hours a day, some days, I imagine. I mean,
Well, there's that. We would also a lot of time on bikes because you're
yeah.
trying to rest the spine. So, but yeah, there's any which way you look at it, whatever the modality is, there's the volume required to train the efficiency aspect. So that where the aerobic component and a more is more, like the more you can tolerate is going to move the needle, even if there is diminishing returns after a point. But then there's the weights that go into it. So it is this yeah, it's the longer the event, as you know, the more time investment, unless there are ways around it. And I'm definitely going for a more efficient approach, but it's not as efficient as if I wasn't training for a marathon. It does beg the question for you. I think some of the curiosity with an interest in you doing a 2K would be, what does a carnivore diet look like when the energy requirements are a little bit different? So because it's one of those things that I think works for a lot of people, and I would love to get into the weeds of it with you, but I could think of circumstances where it wouldn't. And I've not really heard you speak in terms of, obviously you're a carnivore advocate, and it's seem like something that's emerged over time, and I want to know a bit more about the genesis. But I think it's worth getting clear on whether or not you think it's optimal for everyone or optimal for people in certain circumstances. So if they have an ailment that would be alleviated by something that's pro-inflammatory, whether it's grains or whether it's vegetables, by avoiding that, there's an immediate improvement. But I wonder if you think, oh, the carnivore diet would work for everyone, or it works for a lot of people, or it works for some people in some instances. So is it this um, Is it for health or is it for performance or is it depends?
Yeah, well, I mean, anything I say is going to be speculative because we just don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the reality. Now, I can tell you that my greatest interest is it in its application for disease. Because as a physician, I'm very excited when somebody with Crohn's disease comes off their meds and gets a normal life back, or somebody with refractory mental illness becomes like normal again. So that's where I like to see it. Now, as far as when it comes to athletic performance, I mean, I mean, we've got all kinds of examples of ketogenic athletes doing all these ultra marathons, and the question is, well, how fast can they do? Can they run a sub 2 hour marathon? And no one's done that so
Yeah.
far to this. We've seen. There's a gal who's carnivore, it's a female. She ran a sub 3 marathon, totally on carnivore, no problem. I mean, she trained for it. I mean, again, that's still when you start getting around 210, then you start really looking at. I
Yeah.
mean, these are still numbers. Now, I will tell you from a rowing standpoint, from a 2K rowing standpoint. There's a guy who was on the U.S. national team for a while. His name's Michael Clower. Big guy. He's like, 6'10". He's like 2 meter, whatever, 2 meter 10 or something like
Yeah.
that. Big, huge guy. He did carnivore. And I was there when he competed at the national championships in the indoor rowing. He came one year. And when I competed, and he happened to be there. And he was rowing. He was on pace to row about a 5:45, which is a
Yeah.
significant.
Yeah.
And then he blew up in the last 100 meters and ran up rowing like a 5:50, which is still
Still
pretty damn
handy.
good
Yeah.
as a carnivore. So I mean, I think it's there, but I think really it's what you are chronically adapted to over time because most of us, including myself, ate carbs our whole lives and they're pretty dependable and you're kind of used to it and your metabolism and your body is just prepared for that. And I think if you want to do something outside, like for instance, there's a guy who was just in the Paris Olympics. He's a 400-meter hurdler, and he was struggling with a few issues, some niggles. He had I think, some gut issues. He might have had a few joint issues, and he had just barely qualified to go to the U.S. national trials. And he was like the 20th guy, like barely made it in, and he ended up finishing in the top three. But in that time between the invite and starting, he switched over to carnivore. So he got a better performance. He actually ran I think he had the 30th of best all-time 400-meter hurdle run time listed on the clock. So that's a very good performance. I mean, he's like one of the top guys of all time, and he's done that largely as a carnivore. So I mean, another guy on a U.S. wrestling team, Seth Gross, he went carnivore for the same thing. He had injuries, he had issues, and he found that out of necessity he was forced to do that. So I do think we can adapt to that. Now, whether you're just naturally gifted and you're forced into this thing and you just have enough genetic and natural gifts that you can make that work, just like somebody with some other impediment still overcomes that. Perhaps it's an overcoming, maybe it's an advantage in that particular situation. Like I said, if I got gut issues all the time and I'm trying to compete at a very high level, that's going to hold me back. But if I'm free to that, maybe that slight difference in power output is made up for by the fact that I feel better. So I don't know that we know. I mean, if you look at like the work of Phil Prinz out of Grove State College, doing some stuff on performance, and this I think he's doing a lot of stuff on like cyclists and more endurance-based athletes. But he says that the real cause for detrimental performance is not necessarily glycogen reserve. It's not because we always thought it's glycogen, fill up that glycogen tank. It's really blood glucose that seems to predict a drop off in performance. And so what do you need to maintain the blood glucose? And what it turns out is it's a much smaller amount of carbohydrate than thought before. That it may still be important, like if you're running a marathon, instead of consuming 80 grams an hour, 100 grams, whatever you're told you
Yeah.
need to consume, it might be, hey, you can get away with 15, 20 grams an hour, but you have to be chronically adapted to that, I think, and you have to have obviously your fat metabolism, and you got to shift that, that RQ efficient, over to where you're burning a lot of fat, right? So the
Yeah.
respiratory quotient, right?
And you're
Um,
upregulating your gluconeogenesis as well. So that becomes if you
ye-
need some amount of carbs and there's none
yeah, and I
coming.
think that's interesting, and I know like animal studies will suggest that a high protein diet, can a lot of times alleviate some of that stress, and so, and we know we've seen studies on like low carb athletes that they need more protein than what a
Yeah.
standard athlete because some of those amino acids are going to be turned in obviously structure. A lot of it goes to structural needs. Some of it turns in energy, whether it's ketones or glucose, depending upon the amino acids. Some of them, can do both. But I think if you're not consuming carbs, then protein can kind of fill that role in a way. And
Yeah.
again, the reason you may not want carbs may be purely for health reasons. I mean, some people do better. I can tell you as an old guy, I just feel better without them. I mean, that's just the reality. That's why I do it. If I could get away with eating all these carbohydrate foods, I would do it. I don't mind it. I don't. It's not like I don't like the things.
Yeah.
It's just I just from a performance standpoint, I just feel better. I sleep better. It's easier to maintain body composition. The more and the other thing is, because I'm a big guy. I at one point I was over 300 pounds when I was powerlifting. I can eat a lot and I got a big appetite. And if I eat carbohydrates, it's just like I just get hungrier, and
Yeah.
it's hard to
Palatability
sort of
is,
the palatability and the lack of satiety. I think that's really it. Is we are in an age where we all have all these satiety drugs, the GLP-1s. We're finding out that food does that in many ways as well, and that's why I find this to be just it's really easy. And the protein quality is better than I mean the plant. I don't think we're arguing about plant-based. I'm sure you're not going down the vegan route,
no,
but yeah.
I would think though that if I look at, say, vegan at on one end of the spectrum, and then we've got carnivore at the other, and then there's all of the
The
omnivore
normal people
options.
in the middle, right?
Right. And I would definitely skew in that direction, that if I'm helping someone with their nutrition, then I would make protein the focus to at least make sure that we're at sufficiency for a lot of the reasons that you had alluded to, which is to say that it's satiating, that we need a certain amount for maintaining a muscle mass. If we hope to grow muscle mass, that it gets us out of a certain amount of trouble when it comes to eating more carbs than we need if there's sufficient protein, and that it's kind of the hardest to access as you go about life, in that when you go to a normal restaurant, they're going to have something that needs to be palatable. So people come back and it's mostly going to be carbs and fat, and then they'll minimize the protein because that's going to be the most expensive thing. So unless you're actually trying and paying attention to what you're doing, if you just kind of default to the norm, then you're going to be protein deficient. So that seems to be the thing that needs paying attention to. But then I wonder, when I listen to you speak about, well, this, I feel better when I do this. And I wonder if there was another version of you that was carnivore in principle, maybe a bit more of the Paul Saladino approach. So we've got this carnivore foundation, but if a person felt better, or at least just as good, with maybe fruit, maybe honey, maybe some vegetables, that would you still say that person should be a carnivore, or would you say do what works for you?
No, I absolutely. I'm not religious about this. I could care less what people eat. Like I said, I look at it as this is it's it simplifies the problem a lot of times. So I think a lot of what we suffer from when it comes from disease standpoint is probably environmental exposure to things. And when you simplify that, and this is where a carnivore elimination diet
Yeah.
becomes in handy. Again, I have the opportunity to speak to, I mean, thousands of people a year, through consultations and through our company, where we have an entire healthcare company with loads of doctors that work for us, and they talk to these people. Some
Rivero?
people, yeah,
Is that,
Rivero,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So that's what we, that was my effort to, kind of change a little bit the healthcare paradigm. Instead of the 15-minute once every 3 months, review your labs, here's your pills, see you in 3 months type of thing. What I find is when you're treating chronic disease, you got to be more hands on. You got to spend time. You got to encourage, motivate. You need more than just you need a supportive doctor that wants to attack some of the root cause things. I mean, when it comes to health, as you know, I mean, as a healthy person, it's not just about pills, pills, procedures, and various potions. It's about sleep. It's about nutrition. It's about activity. It's about how you interact with your light environment. It's about stress mitigation. So the fact that most physicians either don't know anything about it or don't appreciate it, or maybe they appreciate but don't really know much about it, is a real shame. And I think we should be, as a doctor, as a healer, as a teacher, we should have some level of expertise in all those areas, quite honestly, and not just the small slice that we've been given in medical school. Unfortunately, it's a very good vehicle by which to sell pharmaceuticals and prop up that industry. But I think we're letting our patients down and doing a disservice by not being experts in that area. So I've tried, within my own, just for my own personal reasons, to learn a lot about exercise and nutrition and sleep and all those other things that are critical to performance. And I think there's some parallels between athletic performance and overall health. Now, obviously, there's athletes that are sabotaging their health, as you
Yep.
know. I mean, it can be a road to destruction in many ways. But I think generally, things should line up in the right direction. Good physical human performance should equate to good health.
Yeah, I think you are right. I wonder as you get to the tip of the spear, if I know that there are trade-offs being made, and I wonder if there has to be such that at the very furthest reaches of human performance, whether it is healthy or not, because I don't really think elite. I think sport is healthy. I think elite sport, if you just look at injuries and overuse and some of the chronic conditions, and the mental health issues that correspond with it, it's hard to look at it and go, well, that's healthy. And I say this to someone that spent most of their life in and around that space.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I think, like I said, now I'm in a very different realm. I'm a masters athlete. And being a master, even if I were the number one guy in the world, I'm still kind of average-ish when it comes to overall human performance. Like this year I pulled a 1:15.8 on the rower at 500 meters, which is it's pretty damn good. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's good
but
at
if I
any
stack
age.
myself, yeah, I mean, I stack myself in it, and I would still be competitive with most of the 20, but I wouldn't be the top guy. I'm not pulling a 109,
Yeah.
109.8 or whatever the world record is right now, which would probably require me to blow up. Probably something would, my head would fall off or something like that. So, I mean, but I mean, I think that, yeah, you're right at the very, very tip of the spear when you're in your athletic prime in your 20s and 30s and I mean, and all the pressure that goes with that. I mean, it's not just the performance physically, but there's all the psychological pressure and maybe some financial pressures that are put upon. This is how I make my living, and some guys got millions of dollars on the line, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff around that stuff, as you probably are aware. I think that changes the game a little bit. But I think and I think really when we look at like exercise and activity, it's like the biggest gain is going to be going from sedentary to non-sedentary. That's going to give you huge rewards. And then going from maybe the bottom third to the top third, still good gains, but going from the top third to the top 1%, it's probably minimal. And then at some point it's probably even negative. I
Yeah.
don't disagree with that. I think it's one of those things where you have to, I mean, to be a top 1%, to be a world champion, you have to make sacrifices, social sacrifices, family sacrifices, sacrifices in other areas that may, come back and bite you, down the road.
Yeah. And I think we both would say that if you could have the same pursuit at that top end, but with a more healthy approach, if possible, then your performance would be even better. It doesn't have to be a trade-off. It just often is because there's competing interests or because the pursuit of performance is done in a way that compromises health where it might not need to be. So volume of training is an obvious one where because athletes want to get after it, they can get into a more mindset when perhaps doing less at a higher quality with better recovery would improve performance, but then they might feel like they're taking a risk in order to do that, and then they might lower their performance, which if it's their profession and their identity is kind of the one thing they can't do.
Well, and I think that's the way. I mean, obviously, performance enhancing drugs. I mean, people are, I mean, obviously, if the difference between you making $50 million a year and working at McDonald's is taking some injections, a lot of guys are going to make that decision. I
Yeah.
mean, I can see that. I think that also there are so many people competing for those very few coveted spots. And you look at like NCAA to athletes. It's like 3% of high school kids make it there, and then the number of the ones that get to Division I is 1% of that, and then it's and professional is a fraction of that. And so the teams can kind of afford to have these flash in the pan guys perform at their top level. Maybe they only can maintain it for a year or two. They get hurt, they're out, they just bring the next guy in. And so, but as an athlete and you're looking after yourself, you got to say, what can I do to maintain my level of performance over the years, the decades, and then hopefully survive that sport, not come out a cripple, which is a lot of what you see. A lot of these ex-athletes are just, they can't. What's really amazed me is I've met a number of Olympic gold medalists, and and they're like 40, and I'm like, you look like shit, dude.
Oh,
What the hell?
mate,
I mean, you're one of the best in the world. And they're like, I'm just too beat up. I can't do anything. I lost the motivation.
yeah,
It was just burned out of me to the point where, you don't care anymore. And that to me, I can't fathom that because maybe because I was never really, really good. I was just like, I'm going to keep grinding because I like it and it's fun and I
yeah,
like that aspect, but I never really burned myself out.
yeah. It's funny you mentioned that because I spoke to an Olympic gold medalist on Monday, uh, and we talked about this because if you have that level of success in your chosen field, it often comes with a lot of volume, which is not sustainable. And it's a problem for a lot of athletes in that they've got coaching and they've kind of got a lifestyle that supports their training and they've got high volume. So they've got more scope for nutritional indiscretion. And then it changes because they retire either by choice because they need to move on with their lives or they're injured. And then they've kind of got this wrecked body and an environment where they're not set up for success and no one really cares anymore if they're training and what they do. And then you go, oh, well, it's quite obvious why that might lead to a lack of success for a lot of former athletes. And when you're an Olympic gold medalist, there's nothing that says that you should be any different just because of it. And so this is on my in my effort to come into terms with not being an Olympic gold medalist, I've thought, well, maybe if I were, then I wouldn't still be getting after it because I'd be resting on my laurels and I'd hang my hat on this thing that I did. But because I didn't have that level of success in sport, I'm still trying to, I'm still just as enthused to get after it as I always were. Whereas for some of my teammates that were more successful in the sport, that's not the case. And as you know, there's so many variables, so you can't really account for, well, one sets you up for the life success versus others. But I'm playing this game as you are now, where performance is still important, but this longevity piece becomes more important as you get on. And then you realize relative to people of the same age, if you just maintain, you start looking pretty good because most people start falling off a cliff.
Yeah, or they die. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
like the more age groups you get, the less the competition is. It's kind of interesting. But again, you're always, like I'm always referring to myself because I'm like, I remember when I was competing in Highland Games. I won a world championship in Masters Highland Games. If
Yeah.
I didn't mention that, but I remember I was competing with this guy named Mike Babb, and Mike Babb was this NFL player, and he was competing in Highland Games. You put the kilt on, big guys,
Yep.
you just throw stuff, and I was kind of in the middle. I was 6'5", 290 pounds. I was kind of mid-sized for that. I mean, there's some really big blokes in that. And I remember Mike was in the 50. I was in the 40 whatever plus class, and he was in the 50 plus class. And Mike still kept himself in good shape. And he was, played in the NFL, was still got after it. Never, I don't think he ever won a Super Bowl. I think he was a center, so he wasn't really in a glory position. So he still probably had the competitive drive, but without all the just ultimate prize type of stuff. Like you
Sure.
said, that might just say, I'll never achieve that again, so why bother? But I remember he was sitting there and he would hang out with us, the 40-year-olds, because he identified with it. And then he'd go back, I gotta go compete with these old fuckers again. Because there's all these
Yeah.
fat guys with, and he's like, I just don't identify with that. And so it's
Yeah.
one of those things that, so I'm always looking at what my numbers are because I've got a catalog of things I know I've done in my life. And I'm like, when I get close to a PR or lifetime best, even at this age, I'm like, when I was 40, and I would say even at 58, I'm a better, stronger athlete than I was at 45. That's when I started to see a drop off is when, early 40s, mid 40s, I started to see declines. And at that point, I was kind of accepting, I'm just getting older. I can't compete like I used to. I ache more. And that's where diet really rescued me. And I have to be honest. I mean, when I remember the first time I went carnivore and I stopped having quad tendon pain, I was like, well, shit, I can jump again. I can run again. I can sprint again. That was liberating to where I can get after it again. And so I'm still very fortunate. I mean, yes, eventually there'll be a decay, but I think I've staved that off. And, with some of the, as you know, I mean, training has gotten more sophisticated and there's a lot more knowledge and we're starting to learn how to do this. And so if you can apply some of those things, you can, as an Olympian, you probably were exposed to a lot of that really cutting edge technology where the average person, it filters down to us years later. And so I'm starting to pick into some of that
Yeah,
stuff and it's
it is
fun,
funny like that. The bicarb is
Yeah.
sort
Sodium
of
bicarbonate. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And we were doing that in the 90s.
you get a
And
bloated gut? Did you guys just do baking soda and get a
yeah,
big
we
bloated
did
gut?
baking
Yeah.
soda, old school, and then trying to get the measurements right when maybe this is in high school that we were dabbling with it and have been at world championships when it's gone wrong for teammates. Now it seems like they've improved the so it's not this raw baking soda, but that they're combining it with something that decreases the gastrointestinal
Mm.
stuff. But we missed at the 2009 World Championships. I don't want to name any names, but one of the guys in my crew just repeated trips to the toilet such that we missed a good chunk of our warm up. And so whether the juice is worth the squeeze with something that might give you a percent or two improve performance, which is not nothing.
No,
But
at that level, 1% is first place to seventh place or something
right,
like that in many
unless you
cases. Yeah,
get
yeah.
5% worse because your guts are falling out your asshole.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and that's so it's a high risk, high reward. But then oftentimes that's what elite sport is. But if you're going in there with I'm good enough without that, so I don't need to run that risk, then that's kind of the trade-off that's been made. But if that risk is decreased because the technology's improved, then but it's funny because people are they're coming across it for the first time. And then to me, this is a 15-year-old technology. And as you were talking about access to advancements in training, I was thinking, oh no, it's we all kind of have access to the same stuff with the internet, but then that's not entirely true. Something you mentioned, which is you focus on what works for you, you focus on your prime metrics. It seems like you also pay attention to what in the things that you're focused on. Say if it's sprinting on the erg, you want to know what are younger guys doing, what's the best in the world, so you know what the standard is, even if you're not holding yourself to it. You just want to know where you are in the pecking order, but you're focused on what works for you. And most people, I think, are focused on themselves. So most people listening to this conversation be thinking they're kicking the tires on a carnivore diet and figuring out how to go about it and whether it makes sense for them within the context of their lives. And I think, especially for people that have issues, so they have joints that don't feel great or they have stomach issues, an elimination diet of some description is probably worth doing. With you, when you implemented it in the first place, and there was no carnivore book, there was no Shawn Bakers, there was no Paul Saladino's, there were Inuit, there was people in a predominantly meat only or ketogenic style diet. There was Atkins, but it must have been a bit of a leap of faith for you. And was it something you did cold turkey? And what was I understand that there was a reason because you were feeling a bit beat up. But how did you think that that was going to be the path forward for you?
Yeah, so I mean, at that time I was 49 years old. I was already on a low carb diet at the time. I was already doing like a ketogenic diet at the time, and I noticed some positive things around satiety. It was like, big guy always having an ass. First time I wasn't hungry, so I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I came across a group of people, online that were doing this all meat diet. They called it a zero carb diet. I thought they were nuts. I thought this is crazy. It doesn't make sense. But it was, I had some morbid curiosity, and I said, well, let me just see what's going on. Ask some questions and look at some of the literature they had sent me to, and so I, learned about guys like Stefansson, who was a explorer with the Inuit, and all the stuff that was done in the 1920s, and seeing some stuff with some of the athletic stuff. I mean, there was a guy named Art Shrub who was a runner, a world-class runner around the turn of the 20th century, and he like literally was leading the world in like every running event from the 100 meters up to like 10,000 meters or even a marathon. I mean, he was just like the guy, and he was basically eating a carnivore diet. And this is 120 some years ago, 130 years ago. So I thought, well, it's worth just trying. Why not? I'm an athlete. I'll see if it helped. And, I can understand why eating a bunch of red meat would potentially have a benefit to our athletic performance. You hear about boxers would be eating raw blood or, just raw steaks before they got in the ring. I mean, maybe it's all just coincidence, but I said, well, I just want to do one meal. I mean, just eat steak and eggs, not a big deal. I mean, it wasn't that revolutionary, but I wasn't accustomed because I was always had if I would have steak and eggs, there might be some juice with it, or a piece of toast, or a yogurt or something like that, so I just kind of put that away, and I was like, I feel pretty good. And then from one day, one meal went to one day, and then one day went to 2 to 3. And then eventually in 2016, I did it for 30 days and was public about it on Twitter at the time. I had a following of, 3, 4 thousand people, enough to get some people interested. And so that's how I began. And what I noticed was, I didn't die of scurvy. I didn't get a heart attack. And my colon didn't fall out from lack of fiber. None of those sort of potentially bad things happened to me. But what I did notice is I felt really good. I was like,
Yeah.
my energy's good, and I don't have as much inflammation. My 50-year-old joints felt more like 30. So I was like, I really like this. But then 30 days were up, and I said, I'm not going to do this for the rest of my life. It doesn't make sense. Went back to my mixed diet, my low carb mixed diet, and then I immediately felt worse. I was like, my back started hurting a little bit, and I was just like, because I've been deadlifting for God since I was 18 years of age, so for 40 years now,
Yeah.
and so I was just like, I just like feeling better. I
Yeah.
just like feeling better, and so that's what kept me doing it. And I ended up doing it. I remember my wife, how long are you going to do this for? I said, I don't know. Let me see. Maybe I'll do it for a year. And I ended up doing it for a year, and at that time, Rogan, of course, picked me up, and then and then I was asked to write a book about it, and so I did, and so that's where it started. And I mean, I still, I'm pushing 60, and I still feel pretty damn good. I mean, I'm pretty
Yeah.
excited that even the perspective that I'm trying to dunk a basketball at 60 and all these things is even a possibility is, I mean, it's not just that I'm eating one particular diet. I mean, I've had a lifetime of dedicated training and not doing stupid stuff. I mean, but I mean, still pushing myself. You got to push yourself. You can't just, because I hear a lot of people saying, oh, you're old, you need to slow down. And I've been hearing that since I've been 30. Oh, wait till you hit 30. Wait till you hit 40. Wait till you hit 50. Well, I'm still waiting. I'm still getting after it. And there's no reason not to, in my view.
I got some of that in high school. When you stop training, you're just going to blow up.
Oh, I
Because
stopped
it's it.
training then.
Well, I was like, why would I ever, like, I love it.
Yeah.
And it's what I know. And, you would adjust intake proportional to output. This is sort of obvious stuff, but it just seemed unsustainable to them because they're not me. But it's all very achievable. You just got to do the work, but the more consistently you do it, the easier it gets. It's not hard for you to go work out now. It's just a very normal thing, I'd imagine. It's like you just do it. There's no psychological leveraging. No, it's a fun thing to go do.
No, I mean, I literally feel the most alive when I'm performing.
Hmm.
Honestly, I mean, I feel like that's what it feels like to be alive. And as you get, the older you get, the relatively more beneficial it is, because as you know, I mean, 80-year-olds that regularly strength train act more like 60-year-olds, and those that 60-year-olds that don't strength train act more like 80-year-olds. And so
Yeah.
it's like it's so beneficial, and strength training is just one component. I think the high intense hitting those high numbers is important. I think that obviously maintaining your cardiovascular fitness, your cardiorespiratory fitness rather, is incredibly important. But I think the other thing is, and this is the part that's often overlooked, is that we talk about the engine, cardio, heart and lungs. This is the engine of our body. We got to take care of that. But if the wheels are flat, if the chassis broke,
Yeah.
that engine ain't going anywhere. It's going to seize up. So you gotta have healthy knees and ankles and all those things. And I think diet does play a role in that. I mean, if we look at the difference between a young knee and an old knee, and as an orthopedic surgeon, I've had my camera in thousands of knees, and I can tell you, when you get in a 15-year-old kid, it looks beautiful. It's white as a fresh fallen snow. It's pristine. You get in there and the inside of a 50-year-old's knee, and it looks like the inside of an ashtray. It's all yellowed and discolored, and that's all. What that is all glycation. And so we're it's unstable blood glucose levels, it's fructose levels, and it's also oxidized lipid peroxidases. Those things can be modified through diet. I mean, you can't completely avoid it. I mean, you're always going to have some blood glucose, you're always going to have some blood fructose, but you can limit that so that instead of developing arthritis in your 50s and 40s, not maybe you get it in your 80s and 90s, which is obviously preferable. Because I looked, like, what about wild animals? Wild animals, because they're eating their normal diet. You assume a wild animal is eating its normal diet would not get arthritis. They still do. I mean, like
Yeah.
lions will get back arthritis. I mean, granted, there's some trauma that goes on. They're often, they have a very traumatic life. But I think you can slow it down. And, like I said, if my nearly 60-year-old knees are like a 40-year-old, then I'm going to perform probably more like a 40-year-old, I think, as long as I have the will to do it.
Yeah. And do you think it requires I know the training doesn't, but the nutritional piece that does require ongoing effort for you, or is it like the training now where you like eating what you are, and because it's habituated, you don't miss what you don't eat. So there's just a thing that you do like the training.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think a lot of it is, the grass is always greener. If we've got access and we look at things, it has become habituated to me. I've got a freezer full of steaks. I go in there, pick out a steak, throw it in there, get it ready for dinner, and breakfast and early. I usually eat early. I cook it up and I do it. I don't think about my
Yeah.
nutrition that much anymore. Just like I don't think about training as an option. Now, I might think about what do I want to do today? What am I trying
Yeah.
to accomplish? I mean, that there's a general
Yes.
pattern in my mind. But as far as the decision, yes or no, it's
Yeah.
always yes.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it's like, well, maybe I'm
Yeah.
gonna have a rest day here, but I mean, so it does, it's not really difficult. Now, if I'm traveling and I'm out of town and I'm out of my element, then yeah, then things become a little bit more challenging. But at home, and that's why I like, I like being at home. I mean, it's just like
Yeah.
I like my life where it is. It allows me to do these things. I have to travel for speaking engagements and work and all those types of things, but it's not hard. I don't find it, I struggle nutritionally, and that's the thing. One of the nice things is because this diet is so damn simple. How many steaks do I want? One or two? And very little, a little bit of variation on that, but not much. It's not challenging, because a lot of people when they're planning out their nutrition, they're weighing and balancing and
Yeah.
counting and calculating and stressing, and it's just like, does it need to be that way? I mean, maybe, again, maybe if you're performing at the 1% of the 1% of the 1% level and everything down to the gram is measured out, I can see where that becomes necessary. But I think for the majority of us, even most people that are athletic, it's probably not as doesn't need to be quite as regimented.
Yeah. Or as convoluted. I would say the
Yeah.
upside of the carnivore diet in that really streamlines what are the options available. And if you're not messing around with processed meats, then you've basically got meat and eggs, and then arguable, where dairy fits in. But one thing you did mention I just want to flag is the scurvy piece. You said in passing, and we now know that if you consume less carbohydrates, you have less need for vitamin C.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it. I mean, I think that if we look at what vitamin C does in our body, now clearly I don't get as much vitamin C as if I were eating fruits and vegetables. I get a little bit in meat. There is some there, and we've known since 1882 or something like that that scurvy was actually both prevented and cured by fresh meat. So, and when I mean fresh meat, I mean meat, not dried meat, not the stuff that a sailor would have on a boat, like beef jerky or something like that, or biltong if you're South African.
Mhm.
So if you have access to fresh meat, you don't get scurvy. And the thoughts are that one, vitamin C has a critical role in carnitine metabolism and producing carnitine, which is important for fat oxidation. And the fact that I'm eating a bunch of meat, I absorb actually a lot of that carnitine. We actually have carnitine transporters in our gut, so we're filling our tank up on carnitine. And it's interesting. There was an interesting study out of Stanford University 2018, and they looked at major depressive disorder, and they found that people that had low carnitine levels tend to be more depressed. And we can make it endogenously to a low level, but we get it a lot of it exogenously through what we eat. So we have more carnitine coming in. We know that the glucose molecule and the vitamin C molecule are nearly identical. If you look at a projection, like an organic chemistry projection of the two, they're very similar. They share the same exact transporter. They compete with each other. So if there's a lot of glucose, vitamin C gets stuck in traffic, right? So when the glucose is a little lower, you get more vitamin C transporting across membranes. Our red blood cells can recycle vitamin C. We see that, for instance, vitamin C is also an antioxidant. It's famously known as an antioxidant. Well, when you're in a low carb state, your endogenous antioxidant system is often upregulated. So we see, a lot more of, like superoxide dismutase, glutathione levels tend to rise in a low carb state. So I think the requirements go down, and so, I think there's a combination of you need less and you're effective at utilizing it better.
It definitely seems like we're becoming more of aware that some of the constituent components of meat have these additional benefits. I'm thinking of creatine used to be this thing that it was, well, I remember when it first came out, it was semi-sketchy. It was, people thought it might be dangerous because it was just understudied, and now we know it's efficacious, it's not dangerous, and that there's cognitive benefits. So we're seen as this thing that could potentiate sport performance, but now we're seeing that in certain instances, such as after a bad night's sleep, for cognitive improvement, for ameliorating depression, that creatine can serve this purpose. And the best source of creatine is red meat. So it's not that
Yeah,
it's just,
in natural form, yeah. I mean, obviously
yeah,
you get it in
yeah,
concentrates
exactly,
and
exactly.
supplements, but yeah.
Um, One thing you mentioned was that this conversation you'd had with your wife, and I guess it was an evolution where like, how going to try this thing? And a lot of people are thinking, well, with the carnivore diet, that it's something that they might want to try, but they're kind of thinking, how would they do that within the context of their lives, given that they sit down for dinner with their spouse and maybe their kids, and so they're going to have to make this change. And I think it might be easy to think for someone like you, this is what you do, this is what you're known for now, but it's not where it started. So as it stands now, is this something your family does, or are they, to what extent are they doing this with their own nutrition? Is that transitioned at all, or is it you're doing you and with your family and they're doing what they're doing a bit more conventionally? What does that look like?
Yeah, so my wife, she was about 20 years vegetarian. And when I met her, she
Wow.
was kind of coming out of vegetarian. She just started including fish in her diet. And so and she kind of watched my transition. It took about 5 years before she would eat any red meat. Remember the first time she had a burger, it was like a celebration that she's finally sort of kind of come over this fear. Now she's probably 90% carnivore. She eats steak every night. She loves it. She wants me to make it for her all the time. She does include things like a little bit of vegetables, a little bit of fruit, a little bit of dairy products in there. And so what a lot of times our dinner will look like this. I'm out on in the barbecue, cooking up a big old piece of meat of some sort. I'll bring it out on the cutting board, slice it up, and then we kind of eat like family style, and there might be some cheese, you might have some fruit cut up, maybe a few other items, and we just whatever people want is what they eat, and that's how it works. And none of my kids are full carnivore. I've got 4 kids, and they're all big meat eaters. They all eat a lot of animal products. They know that they're very understand that protein is very important for them to get, and they understand that helps with satiety, and they're all athletic and lean and normal, functioning brain wise, quite good kids. So that's how the house works. I mean, we're, um, I don't for my kids have never been forced vegetables. I mean, when they were younger, I used to do that because you got to eat your vegetables. Hey, if you want to eat this
Yeah.
grilled cheese sandwich, you got to eat your broccoli first, or whatever it might be. And they always hated it, and I always felt like a bully trying to force them to eat stuff that they didn't like. And now I'm like, hey, eat them if you want them, but I want you to eat them. I'm very much kind of the other one. It's like, hey, let's eat some meat, and they usually like it. It's not a problem. It's not like they're resistant to that because they like it. It tastes good, and I think that's kind of how nutrition should be. I know people say, well, sugar tastes good. Well, I mean, it's like, well, a lot of this is manufactured, and they've hacked our physiology, inappropriately. But I mean, the natural things that taste pretty good. I'm sure you like a well marbled, juicy steak. I don't think it's a hard sell for most people. I think most humans, particularly men, particularly, it's easy to get to. But yeah, my family is not carnivore. My wife is close to it, but it's not an issue. And like I said, I do most of the cooking. I'm the only here. And this is an aside. The only difficulty I have is that my wife, for some reason, still wants her steaks well done, which kind of drives me a little crazy, to be honest. It's just kind of like, 'cause I'm like, don't ruin that nice piece of meat by well done. Because if I cook like a roast, and I got like, oh man, I got to overcook this thing, and then I got to suffer through it a little bit. But anyway,
We all make compromises.
yeah, exactly right.
And I
Yeah.
think this is the practical side of things, because people have reasons not to do all sorts of things, not to work out, because here's the ways in which it's inconvenient. And often when trying to make positive changes, if it feels like there might be some friction with the people that you care about, then that also might be a reason not to. So when people and get a little bit of visibility to someone like you and how steadfast you are now with what you're doing, the practical side is, okay, the people that are in your immediate orbit, what does it look like for them? And it seems like with your wife, you've pulled her along and she's deriving the benefits, but it's not 100%. And that your kids eat sufficient meat, but they're not carnivores either, and that you're not requiring that they be.
Yeah, and again, I like I said, I don't really care what people eat. I mean, if they're my kids, I want them to eat healthy food. I mean, but
Yeah.
beyond that, it's up to you. Again, because a lot of people consult me to do carnivore, and I said, why do you want to do it? What's the point? What are you trying to cure? Or what kind of situation? If they don't have a good reason to do it, I'm like, well, there's no reason to do it. I mean, if you're healthy and fit and active and no issues, why fix what's not broken? In my view. And so, but like I said, I do think that for people that are struggling, and one of the things that it's because Sam, because you're what, in your 30s now? I can't remember how
I'm
old you are now.
41.
You're 41. Okay, so you
Yeah.
crossed over 40. So as you get older and older, I mean, a lot of people just accept that this is aging. And I would submit to a lot of people that what you think is attributed to aging may not be. It's probably attributed to poor sleep and diet and drinking too much and all these other things that we tend to do and just associate with aging. But when you clean that up, you'd be surprised at how good you actually feel. So I think there's value in something like that, and again, this is just one of many. There's lots of diet options out there that you can pick. And I again, I wish I could say there's randomized controlled trials that show this is it's just not happening. And I mean, the reality is, the short-term stuff we can do, and in fact, there are we've got several scientific studies published on this, particularly case series around things like inflammatory bowel disease and mental health issues and a couple of, and there's one case series that's going to be published on multiple sclerosis and another one on psoriasis coming out. So these studies are coming out, and then hopefully we got some interventional trials that will soon follow. But as far as like people, because a lot of the biggest question, when I first started this, back, let's say 2016, I said carnivore diet. Well, actually, 2019 was when the book came out. So when I started talking about just eating meat in 2016, 2017, people were like, what the F is that?
Yeah.
They'd
Yeah.
never heard of it. That was crazy. Then by about 2019, it was like, well, you're definitely going to die. We know what it is and you're going to die. And then when we didn't die, it was like, well, maybe it works for you, but it's not going to work for anyone. Then there was a lot of people saying it worked for them. Well, maybe it works for them, but it's not the perfect diet. I'm like, okay, whatever. They just keep backsliding on what the criticisms are. And now it's just like, well, you're going to shorten your life, or you're taking a risk 20 years from now. And that becomes increasingly speculative, because I'm like, well, based on what data?
Yeah.
Are you assuming that we can use USDA data on people that eat junk food and happen to eat meat? Is that's
Yeah.
going to tell
Well,
me
that's
what
what they
can
that's what
happen
they
to me?
use.
Well, it
They-
is, and so
yeah.
I said, like I said, I'm not here to guy to say carnivore is going to make me live longer or shorter, because I just don't know. What I can say is that I perform well and I feel good, which I
Yeah.
think is that's quality of life, and that's really what I'm concerned about. And
Yeah.
I don't know that we should be in the business of predicting the future, or like some people think they're gonna live forever. These guys.
Yeah.
It always cracks me up when you get
Brian
these guys saying,
Johnson.
"Yeah, I'm gonna beat death, or I'm gonna live till I'm 180," or some you know extreme claim that no one. I'll see it. When I start seeing 120-year-olds that are just robust and
Yeah.
vigorous and performing at a high level, I'll start to pay attention. Until that time, it's just the next Ponce de Leon, squat, quad, there's been people chasing longevity for I don't know how long. It's not like I said, I don't discount the fact that there's things you can do to improve your health, and I think you should do those things. But when you attach, I'm going to live to whatever, I tend to lose, I tend to find that they lose credibility for me.
Seems very contrived as well. Like if this is going to be, if you can live to 120 and you're 40, then the next 80 years is going to be this, looks like a pretty miserable existence.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you've got to spend every minute of your life calculating everything and there's no joy in your life, or you got to do these extreme things, like freeze yourself. Like I'm gonna drop my body temperature by 5 degrees so I can be a vampire, basically. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, even if it did work, maybe it's not worth it. But the real thing is like, I mean, a lot of it, as you probably know, is just it's just marketing. It's just
Yeah.
like I make these outrageous claims, I get a lot of eyeballs on me, and then oh, by the way, then I sell a bunch of supplements, to the tune of tens of $1 million a year. I mean, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, it's a good business strategy, but
Yeah.
I
And then
I
he can
don't have a
say,
lot of
well, these are quality products that we're just offering people, but
right, right,
yeah,
right. But and we're not giving them a right. We're making money on all of these.
right. And which is how it, might appear for you if you're a carnivore advocate. But what I wanted to better understand is the extent to which you think people should do what works for them or if they should do this. And you're clearly saying, hey, this is what works for me. I've seen it work for a lot of people. If you feel good and you don't have any issues, then there's not necessarily a need for you, which seems very reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a social media like 1 second, like meme type thing, which is done for humor and entertainment, and then
Yeah.
what's the reality here? And I mean, I'm pretty a pretty big proponent that it can be beneficial and it should be tried, particularly for diseases.
Yeah.
If you want to stamp a tattoo on your chest and go on social media and call yourself Carnivore Call and eat raw testicles on video, that's up to you. I'm
Yeah.
I could care less
Yeah.
about
And
that
you're
stuff.
not and you're not there yet, although you are in this webosphere now, and I'm sure there's moments when you're doing a reaction video and if you're offering anything and if what you're offering is to help people, they still need to connect to you to know that this is available. So you're engaging with people via this channel that you have, but I don't know what stage you would have decided, oh, okay, I'm going to be a social media person because all of your whole life is built on some pretty sincere, substantive, like there's no funny business with orthopedic surgery or with rugby or with going fast on an erg. There's no flimflammery, whereas in social media there is, and you've got to play the game to an extent if you want people to pay attention to your stuff, but it doesn't align that well with the person that I imagine you would be, and the person that I've heard speak at length on Rogan or wherever. Is that something you had to consciously, okay, I'm going to do this because I believe in the bigger picture?
Yeah, I mean, I remember practicing as an orthopedic surgeon when Facebook was just coming out and people were sharing pictures of their cat and what they had for. I thought that was a stupid. I was like, this is so stupid. I can't imagine anybody wasting their friggin' time. And now I spend an inordinate amount on social media because I've got a company and we have to get the word out there. And you're absolutely right. I'm very much a sincere, serious person. It's a serious issue, but I realize that social media is about entertainment, and it always amazes me that people just post what I think is the stupidest friggin' stuff. And they get a gazillion people watching them. And I'm like, are they providing? I mean, they're providing laughs. I guess a lot of us, we want to laugh or we want to be angry. I mean, a lot of us anger. It's like anger porn. It's like, what can I do that irritates as many people and get them motivated? And the algorithms, unfortunately, the social media algorithms drive that. They don't necessarily drive intelligent, thoughtful, nuanced conversation. That's too boring. So
Yeah.
you got to fight that. I mean, you got to get some eyes on with something. It's like a lot of these women. I can't walk around in a bikini. I mean, I don't have that. I mean, and then you get these women. All they do is show their boobs and their ass, and they've got 2 million followers. It's just like it seems unfair. It's unfair at times.
But no
And then you're
one's
just like,
going, oh, gee, I wonder what insights they might have on my health and well-being or
yeah, for
performance.
sure, for
There's
sure, yeah, yeah.
so there is a bit more substance, even if you need to. And I'm thinking about because I was showing, I told my wife that we were going to have a conversation, and I said, I'm not sure if you've seen these reaction videos because they're not really, it's like the most subtle reaction that you could have is you're sitting there eating a steak and someone says something ridiculous and you've got the clip there and you kind of go, oh yeah, as you go back to eating your steak. And I thought, gee, you're both reacting but you're reacting in the most subtle way possible. So you're playing the game, but you're also doing it at arm's length. And so watching you go through this process where you have a company and you believe in the merits of it, and the way people just the reason it exists is because you have built a platform for yourself. And so the management and growth of that makes sense in the betterment of people's health. But there might be these moments throughout a day where you're feeling like, is this aligned with my purpose on this planet? Or at least that's the curiosity I have, and I have to do a bit of this too. So it makes me wonder.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to be fair, I mean, I have some folks that help with the social media at this point because this got too big. I mean, I'm at close to, almost 2 million across all social media platforms. And so, I mean, I just shot like 100 videos of me eating steak. Like, I eat them every day. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
and, and I mean, initially, I mean, I was watching someone prepare some ridiculous vegan fake food, and it was like 65 ingredients to emulate like a steak. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to put a regular steak there and eat it and show how much you eat. And it was just
Yeah.
a contrast. And for some reason, and I thought it was kind of stupid, but it was very popular. A lot of
Yeah.
people like that. So they said, well, let's just keep repeating that. And it seems to work. So I don't, I don't necessarily have like every time I'll see something that's ridiculous and I'll just forward it to the team and say, this should be fun to
Yeah.
do. But some of that stuff's done on autopilot. I don't think about that much. I mean, as I point out, social media in many ways is for entertainment purposes only. And like I said, I don't necessarily agree with every single thing that I've put up there in the totality. I mean, sometimes I do it just for humor, just to piss off some vegans occasionally because I mean, I think some of them deserve it in the fact that they've been so critical of anybody, like I'm a murderer, I'm a rapist, I'm an animal abuser just because
Yeah.
I eat food that every human has eaten on the planet since humans have walked the planet Earth. This doesn't make sense to me. So you have to push back on that a little bit.
It's
But
also really naive given how many animals get killed in the production of vegetables.
well, I mean, and this is just, I mean, stats that no one cares about. But I mean, like if we talk about like in the United States, we kill about 30 million cows every year. That's a lot of cows. 30 million is a lot. But we kill 4 quadrillion insects and small animals with pesticides everywhere. 4 quadrillions is a lot more than 30 million. I mean, that's, it's orders and orders and orders of magnitude more. And yet we just kind of say, oh, well, I didn't see it. It's not on my plate. I don't care. And so
Yeah.
I just think the ethical argument is just farcical at best. Um, so yeah, I mean, that's really, I mean, that's just a small, I, when I went on Rogan, no one had heard of me. And then all of a sudden I had thousands of vegans comparing me to the Antichrist, like I was some awful, evil person because I suggested you could get healthy by eating a diet rich in meat. So, I mean, it's just been kind of a sidelight thing. But yeah, I mean, the social
Does that
media.
ever get to you as you go about your regular existence as a person? Like you're going through airports, but you're at home for the most part. Is it all online so that if you're not engaging with that online, you can generally avoid it, or is it permeated
Yeah.
into your regular life?
No, I mean, I've never, I mean, I get recognized not that infrequently in airports. Like if there's a group where there's more than 1,000 people, usually someone say, hey, I follow you or something like that
Yeah.
at this point. And it's always been a very nice encounter. So I was like, hey man, I love what you're doing. I shake their hand, we take a picture, I shoot the breeze a little bit. And I'm very approachable. But I've never had a vegan come up to me, say anything. I have talked to some in like conferences where we've had mixed group, and it's been pleasant. It's been cordial and nice. And I mean, again, in real life, I'm a reasonable, nice, rational person. I want what's best for people. Some of the online stuff is just in response to, and again, some of it's just to drive traffic. And I think unfortunately that's the way it works. I'm not a Hollywood celebrity or a famous athlete where I can just post a picture and get gazillions of, views and comments and that type of stuff. So yeah, I mean, there's always that competing interest of what's going to actually get eyes on versus what's valuable, to those people. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, they don't always line up. And so
No.
you got to do a little mixture of both. Like I publish lots and lots of studies that I think are interesting, or I have content that I think is nuanced and insightful. And it's like, yeah, you get a few people and you put some stupid meme up and you get, you know,
Yeah.
50
Yeah.
times the
Is
response,
the
which is
way
kind
that
of,
it goes.
yeah.
I thought the
Yeah.
thing you posted recently, which is you were saying who you were paying attention to in the effort to get better at sprinting. Like
Yeah.
I follow these accounts, this guy for plyometrics, this guy for inspiration, and I think that's really substantive because it says this is what you're doing, that you put it together yourself, but that you consult with other resources because you know you don't know everything. And I thought that
Oh,
was great
yeah.
because that's what I'm trying to do. You know, you're self-coached, but you don't believe that you know it all, and so
Oh God, no.
you want to learn from others, which is what
Yeah, I mean,
others are doing from you.
when I started rowing, I don't know if Zeno Muller.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, Zeno, I went to his house and he taught me how to row on the and we used to fight because I said, I'm trying to row 500. And I was a big deadlifter. I was, close to an 800-pound deadlifter. And I was really using a lot. I had a big layback and I was pulling really hard. And he was trying
yeah,
to change that. And we went, obviously he's training high school kids to get into college and for 2K. So it's a very
yeah,
different approach. And I was just trying to fight with him about like, I know where I can put out where I can put out the most wattage, and so we used to fight a little bit about it. But I mean, that was But when I won the Highland Games, I literally trained with the world champion professional Highland Game guys. I said, how do I get better at this? I mean, it's such a shortcut. I mean, it's like
yeah,
why
yeah, yeah,
reinvent the
yeah,
wheel?
yeah.
And right now, I mean, it's great that guys like Fred Duncan and some of those other guys that are world class strength and conditioning coaches can put out some content so you can get a glimmer. And it requires reading and study, and I watch a lot of stuff and read a lot of stuff, and and just see what's practical for me and how I can adapt that to my own situation, because obviously I don't have, yeah, I'm in my damn garage. I mean, there's only so many things you can do in a garage, and you have to sort of like, okay. And I've like I said, I've had success at a lot of different sports. I mean, and that's because you compile what the people that are really good at it do it and adapt it to your own body, because I'm an expert in my own myself.
Yeah.
I mean,
You have
I
to
know what I
adapt
got
it to
time to do.
you,
Yeah,
and
yeah, exactly.
there's your preferences, there's your athletic history. So even if you had the same exact goal as someone else at the same age, how you got there might be different. So you can't just do what they did. You have to layer in some of the stuff that have worked for others with you, with what you know works for you, which is why I can imagine what that looked like on the erg for 500 meters. And you're like, I know if I do this, I can get better peak power, which is part of the goal here. And then Zeno's looking at it from a different lens, which is more to do with, well, how do we produce this efficiently for a longer distance? And then
Right.
you probably coalesce somewhere in the middle, and that's why you can still go pretty fast over that distance.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I was just like, look, I've got so much power in my low back, and I want to use it.
Yeah.
I know, what traditionally erging is, 60% legs or whatever, 80% legs or something like that. I'm like, my legs are relatively weak compared to my back. I'd like to play to my strength in many ways, and I don't care about a 2K. Yeah, and I know that was just kind of blasphemous for me in the erg world because 2K is the distance, but I'm like, I don't really care about that as much. I mean,
Is
I
everyone
pull,
that yeah that
yeah.
cares about that? I do, but I also if someone's just banging out hundreds or 500s, 1Ks, it's like all power to you. That's no one needs to do a 2K.
Yeah, I mean, I've done like half-heartedly. I pulled like a 630 one time when I was very beginning of my rowing career. When
Yeah,
I was like 46 years old, I hopped on there and I said, I'm just going to pull. I pull it's like a 634, and it was hard, but it wasn't like I probably maxed. I would have been 625 or something like that. But I've never like had the desire to put in the hours and hours and hours of training to do that. I much prefer get in, get out, and it's always an add-on. It's like, sometimes I use my warm-up. I'm going to go and hop on the
yeah,
air, pull a couple 100 meter sprints and then go work out. And
yeah,
it's like people are like, why don't you get on the water? I'm like, well, that's a 3 hour friggin'
yeah.
adventure. I got time for that.
Yeah. I don't even want to do that nowadays. You're like that's that the rowing for you is one part of your performance aspirations, which is a part of what you're more broadly trying to do, which is continue to get after it, feel good, maintain these traits. And so it's a bit piece. It's not the whole thing.
Yeah. And it's just, I'm physiologically pretty well adapted. I'm big, I'm tall, I'm strong.
Yeah.
I got a decent engine, not world class, but decent enough to pull a decent 500. And so that's easy for me. I don't, I literally can not train and hop in there. And for my age group, I can pull top in the world or one of the top in the world with very little training. So that's nice. It's convenient. I'll continue to do that. But like for instance, running, like I want to hit a sub 13-second 100 meters, which it's not that fast, in the scheme of things. But I mean, there's not a lot of 60-year-olds that are pulling
No.
that. That
And
that's
no, at your size.
and at my size, yeah, that's the stuff.
Yeah.
So that's going to require tremendous effort and a lot of like consistency and doing all the little the grinding, the extensive
Yeah.
plyometrics and the intensive stuff and the acceleration drills and the isometrics and the strength training and the stupid, like people make fun of me. I'm doing these, stupid
Yeah. Yeah.
marching drills. Oh, you look like a weirdo. And I'm like, well, that's sorry. Look at
Yeah,
it.
you
Look at
don't
any
care.
Olympic.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
like
look at
this.
any Olympic runner. They do the same
Yeah.
damn stuff.
Yeah. And to make it obvious for those that aren't aware, training for a 2K would make that goal much harder,
Of course.
which
Absolutely. Yeah.
is obvious to you and me, but I think some people think that fitness is fitness is fitness. But if you're trying to really maximize your potential, even with caveats like age, you still need to focus. And the more volume you do, the harder it makes it to go as fast as possible. So they'd be not quite diametrically opposed, but near enough.
Yeah. I mean, obviously a marathon would be worse, right? I mean, that would,
Well, here's
I
the
mean,
caveat to my marathon is I want to deadlift 660, 300 kilos and then run sub three either on the same day or the following day, depending on just the timing of it. So I'm
I think
trying
I would do
to,
the deadlift first.
oh yeah, 100%,
Okay.
because yeah, that's the only way it can happen.
Yeah.
So I don't want to turn into this full on, cardio dweeb. I need to maintain and percolate the strength qualities.
So I mean, I'm just curious how
Mm.
you plan on doing it because I suspect you want to touch top end strength weekly to every other week, something like that, so you can kind of maintain that and say, as long as I can hit, 660, 680 throughout that time, then I should be able to do that very frequently together. That's my thought is I'm going to pull one heavy deadlift maybe once a week, once every other week for the next 2 years, just so I can maintain that. It's not requiring a lot, but as like top end sprinting goes away pretty quick. VO2 max
Yeah.
declines pretty quickly. Strength you can hang on to a little bit longer as long as you don't lose too much body weight.
Yeah, well, I want to do it at over 100 kilos, the marathon, so I can't lose that much. And then it would
Yeah.
also give me a triple body weight deadlift. This all comes together. But yeah, I'm basically doing one main strength session a week with the deadlift focus, but it's far enough away that I'm doing just moderately heavy RDLs, maintaining the movement and the muscle mass for that exercise, and then mostly focusing on the running. As I get closer, running volume will build, but the lifting volume will go down, but the intensity will go up. And something like weekly, with the heavy sessions being every second week, just to manage load. But it'll likely be in about 18 months from now. So still a little ways to go. I have run a marathon before, around a 3:14, and I've pulled
Okay.
3:20 a couple of times. So this is why I think it's achievable. But I haven't really been running for a decade until the last 6 months. So I'm very much feel like a novice when it comes to that. But like you with the sprinting, that doesn't bother me at all. In fact, that's part of the fun, is that if I'm not good at something, then there's more scope for improvement, which is rewarding in of itself. So I'm happy to be pretty average, pretty poor, and then to get better over time and to be able to share insights from that process, I think is useful for others that might have similar goals.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing because when you reach your rowing peak, let's say you're in a boat and I don't know what times you guys pull. You were in an eight. Were you in an eight?
Yeah,
Same.
yeah. We're about
So 440s, 550s,
five
something like.
520 when you're
Oh,
going really
520s.
fast, but
Okay.
530 would be about average for an elite
So
eight.
I mean, but to take a second off of that enormous amount of work, right? I
Yeah,
mean, just enormous amount of work to improve by 1 second once you're at that level.
yeah,
I mean, like in the rowing machine, when you were rowing 112 to get to that 111.4 was an enormous amount of work that
yeah,
goes into just moving that down by a fraction of a second. But when you start something new and you suck at it, it's like you make these huge gains at the beginning, and it's exciting. It's like, wow, I gotten, it's really, it's nice to do that. And you just, as you get older, you just like, I'm going to try the next sport and I'm going to master that. And I'm going to go to the next sport and master that. And I think obviously there's, like I'm never going to be a horse jockey. I'm just too big for that. I mean, there's
Right.
things I can't, I'm not going to be an Olympic
Yeah.
gymnast or anything like that, but there's certain sports that I have, and there's probably 20 sports that I might be good at. And so I'd like to try as many of those as I can, or whatever, something new. And it's just fun when you're striving for mastery. It keeps you engaged. It's good for your brain. And then I think it's good for your body.
Yeah. Especially within, if you're doing it for, if it's a decades long process, then committing 10 years to get really good at something for most people would feel like a massive commitment. But if it's proportionate to the time you've already committed, then it's not, and you're going to do it anyway. So that's why it's for me when there's like a 12-week challenge or like I'm thinking more in terms of years or decades as opposed to weeks.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's like I said, that's why I was kind of thinking about, as I'm getting closer to 60, I'm like, what can I do at 60? I mean, I can
Yeah.
row. I mean, I know I can do, I know, I mean, looking at the world records for 60, I'm like, unless something bad happens to me, I should be able to just walk into those. Not to slight any of the guys that came before me, but and I think what's going to happen is, um, with the level of training and the science we have and the just you're going to see more and more masters athletes that are doing some really really impressive things,
Yeah.
like if you watch like a masters track and field and you see this 100-year-old guy just not dying, just running down the track, and he does 100 meters in 28 seconds, and you're like, well, good job grandpa, you did that.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be blown away in a few years. I
Yeah.
think there's going to be people running like legitimately, like really sprinting at 100. I mean, we're starting to see it in the 70. I see some 70-year-olds that look pretty fluid. And I think we're going to continue to see it. And I think part of that is maintaining that strength. And, I think I think we're really the first generation that really trained for strength is now hitting their 70s and 80s right now for the first time ever, right? I mean, you look Sylvester Stallone, Schwarzenegger, those guys, those
Yeah.
early 70s lifters, and any other people that we don't know their names. And I think you're going to see significantly improved performances, which is exciting, because, I mean, I met a lot of 100-year-olds as an orthopedic surgeon. They were all demented old women in a diaper with a broken
Yeah.
hip. And I was like, that doesn't look fun to me. But if you can be 100 and you can still be out there competing and running and jumping, and that to me is pretty cool.
Yeah. I think, well, I'm curious to see how it evolves for you. You've got a couple of years left till you're 60. I have no doubt that you'll tick some of those boxes. And as we bring things to a close here, just to point people in direction where they can find you, you're Shawn Baker at Shawn Baker on Instagram.
So yeah, Shawn Baker, Shawn Baker, Baker, and then 1967. That's my Instagram account, and then I'm on YouTube, Shawn Baker MD. I'm on Facebook, Shawn Baker MD. I'm on Twitter, Shawn Baker MD, and I'm on X, S Baker MD. So I mean, and then if you're a patient and you're in the US and you need help, Revero.com, Revero.com. We take care of autoimmune, metabolic disease, obesity, diabetes, inflammation, that type of
I really
stuff.
would
So,
suggest that for anyone that's stateside, if they're thinking, I need to make some improvements here, much like you would look at coaches or experts in their field if you wanted to improve performance, to look for some support if you're dealing with chronic conditions, to go see you and your team at Rivera would be a very good idea. And then the carnivore diet, the book is available, and imagine at Amazon and wherever else
yep,
books are books sold
yep.
anywhere else that's not Amazon
No,
nowadays?
well, we got books. We still got some bookstores in the U.S. There's like a Barnes and Noble that still
Yeah.
carries. I think they carry the book in, but yeah, I mean that's you definitely can get it from there.
It'd be a great place to get started. For those that want to know more, Shawn, I really appreciate your time today and the conversation, and look forward to seeing how you get on with those goals. But thanks for the time, mate. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing yours. So we're both about the same time out from our stated goal. So you've got the marathon 660 pound 300 kilo deadlift, and I've got my little deal at 60. So we'll reconvene
We
after
will
we've
we will
accomplished
coalesce
these.
at that stage, though yours does seem more fun than mine as we go through it. I'm like,
I'm
I
not
would
running a
be
marathon,
rather
man.
training for that. I would do that so that by 60 I can come after some of after your goals, maybe by then.
Yeah, we got to hop back on the erg and see what you
No
can throw there.
50-year-old has gone under 6 minutes. And if
Yeah,
that's
let me just before we leave, because you obviously trained as an Olympic athlete in the
Mhm.
standard classic way you train for rowing, but then you got a lot stronger. Like the
Yeah,
average, imagine the average guy in a boat's probably deadlifting 400 plus pounds ish, probably somewhere in that
yeah.
neighborhood. I would guess would be a fair thing. You now dramatically increase that. Do you think that would have? I mean, certainly for the 500 or 100, you would see a benefit for, and so it
That
might
was part
might
of the
be.
reason for.
Yeah.
So what it basically was, the time I was rowing on the water, I was suppressing my body weight because if you're 6'1", which I am, and 235, 240, that's not that practical in a boat with guys that are 220 and 6'7", 6'5". That's more of a rower's somatotype. So I thought, okay, well, I need to be and it was encouraged in that direction by some coaches. Like, we basically can't have you too thick. It's too inefficient. You can't row as long. So I was just in a calorie deficit for most of my 20s. And then by the time I was finishing up with rowing, there wasn't a reason to do that anymore. So then I started to nourish myself and I leaned into the strength side of things. And then I noticed that my power was improving dramatically on the erg. And then as I was focusing more on the strength for the stuff on the erg, then I thought, well, I'm close enough to powerlifting that I may as well go check that out a little bit just to see how strong I could be for the period of time I was prepared to dedicate to it. Then that kind of ran into the pandemic, and I thought my wife was pregnant, wasn't able to go to the gym a lot, so I was like, I don't really need to be 275 just hanging out at 6'1". So I went down a little bit, then started to add in a little bit more conventional cardio training. And I've always had this goal since my 314 to go sub 3 and to deadlift triple body weight because I've been within the ballpark. So I thought, why not do both at once? Because I think I can. But the deadlift is definitely more of my wheelhouse. I will have more innate fun. So it's kind of this sick pleasure that I'll do the marathon training because I want to do the thing, not really because I love that type of training. I sat on the echo bike so yesterday, for example, the humidity here is 80% plus, 50-minute run, and then 90 minutes on the echo bike is not exactly how I'd want to train if it was just training in a vacuum. But when you have a goal, you do what's required. So once I've ticked that box, things will look a little bit different, but that'll probably be connected to, well, what's the goal? And it will probably be, dunking a basketball and doing a backflip and running 100 under 13 seconds or
There you
whatever
go.
it is. It'll be one thing and then the next, just like it has been with you. So that's the thing. I've connected with you that I felt like, oh, I understand you because you're known as this thing, but I know that you see yourself as an athlete. I know that's evolved over time, which it needs to if you want to keep doing it for a long time. So that's the thing that I've really appreciated. And it was great to be able to talk to you about it. And we can reconnect once we've both ticked these boxes.
Sounds like a plan, Sam. All right,
All
awesome. Well,
right.
I'll keep an eye on what's going on with you, and then
Yeah, thanks,
likewise, I
mate.
appreciate your encouragement. Appreciate it,
Yeah.
Sam.
Thanks, Sean.